This is Sharon Cooper. I'm doing an interview of Noble Dorsee, and we are at Bellevue University in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm on the committee for the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'm Noble Dorsey. I'm actually a junior. I was born in Baltimore and raised in Towson, Maryland. Probably pretty normal childhood, outdoors most of the time. I graduated from high school, I was 18, and went to driving a dump truck. And I did that for a year, and the draft board was breathing down my neck. Excuse me. So I decided to enlist in the Air Force. I really didn't want to play in the mud. So I went down to the recruiter's office, and the recruiter said, "What would you like to do?" Oh, he said, "What do you do?" I said, "I drive a truck." "What would you like to do?" I said, "I'd like to drive an airplane." I had never been in an airplane. He said, "Okay, we can do that." Well, unbeknownst to me, and what I learned many months later, was if you didn't make it in any reason in pilot training, you were still in the Air Force, and they would find a job for you elsewhere. But anyway, I wound up going to Bowling Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. for testing, and had 3 days of academic tests and 2 days of physical testing, and got out of there qualified to go to pilot training. Now, at the time, you were supposed to have a minimum of 2 years of college, and of course I had no college. So somehow I got through it and wound up in a program called Aviation Cadets. It was pilot training and officer training combined, and it took about 18 months. And I graduated from there. I had to delay my graduation until I was 21. Therefore, I graduated in January of 1958, a brand new second lieutenant with wings. And as a cadet, we were paid half of a second lieutenant's wages, which was $100 a month. Once we started to fly, we got half a second lieutenant's flying pay, so we got $50 a month. So I was making the princely sum of $161 a month. Oh, base pay was $111, that's right, yeah. Anyway, once I got commissioned, of course, that was doubled, and I was in hog heaven. I bought a new car. Of course, I bought the car for like $2,200. And at any rate, I went to I graduated pilot training at Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas. My first assignment actually was KC 97 training at Randolph in Texas. And from there I was assigned to Hunter Air Force Base in Savannah. I love Savannah. And we were all a new crew. We had gone through training together and came out together, and we're a pretty close-knit crew of 6 men. About 3 or 4 months later, probably in August, a sign was put on the bulletin board at the squadron that said, "Wanted volunteers for an overseas assignment." nobody could determine what the overseas assignment was. And we got together, and there may have been some beer involved, and decided we were going to do it. And we were sent to Bermuda, where I spent 3 years and a couple of months. I got married while in Bermuda, and served the entire time as a co-pilot on a KC-97, primarily refueling B-47s, reflexing overseas from the CONUS. After that, I went to KC-135 school, ground school at Castle, Air Force Base, California, and flying training at Roswell Air Force Base in New Mexico. And my first duty assignment from there was at Griffiths Air Force Base, New York, where I spent just about 6 years. And during that time, I went from co-pilot to pilot, and several of the senior people in the squadron were transferred to Ramey Air Force Base, Puerto Rico, and I guess they liked me because they requested I be sent down there. And so I went to Ramey Air Force Base, Puerto Rico. I had decided I liked island living.
What was the mission in Bermuda?
Refueling B-47s, reflexing to Europe,
Okay.
where they stood alert duty.
Okay.
And in Puerto Rico, I wound up upgrading to instructor pilot, and our primary mission there was also refueling aircraft going back and forth across the Atlantic, and also fighters out of bases in southern Florida. After I left there, I was sent to Vietnam. Now, I had to go to Columbus, Ohio for C-123 training prior to going to Vietnam, and I wound up, that was short, it was only a couple of months. I went to Vietnam in February of '71, I believe I got there. Now, while at Ramey, we were sent to Thailand on an annual basis for 3 or 4 months, refueling fighters going in and out of Vietnam. That was our primary mission. We were in Utapao, Thailand. And we would orbit over Laos and refuel fighters on the way in and get them again on their way out. While doing that, side note, General Westmoreland, who was the overall commander of all operations in Vietnam, visited our base on his farewell tour, and my crew was selected to have lunch with him, and he pinned some medals on us. And that was quite a day. There was a B-52 crew selected also. And out of the 100 or so crews there, we were the only ones that spent time with the general. He was quite a guy. At any rate, after leaving there, I was sent to Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska, where I finished out my career. I started as a instructor pilot in the KC-135 simulator, and wound up in the Operations Plans Division as the resident pilot. And that's where there were about 15 navigators and electronic warfare officers and me. and that's where I retired from the Air Force from. I retired as a major,
With how many years?
23 years service. And that's it in a nutshell.
Okay. When you left Towson, did you leave siblings and your parents behind there?
Oh, my father was a drunk, and he drank himself to death at the age of 51, a couple thousand miles from home. And but I left a younger brother, Bob, and my mother. And Bob unfortunately died some years later of cancer. He was 51 years old. And my mother made it to 89 years old. And I'm 85, so we'll see how that longevity trait pans out. But he went to Duke University, could not qualify to be in the military for physical reasons, and wound up, actually his final job was managing director of Tyco Industries Hong Kong. So he had a very successful career, although shortened by the cancer.
What did your brother and mom think about you going in the Air Force?
Well, my mother was proud of me, and my brother didn't give a darn. He was almost 3 years younger. He didn't care. But my mother was proud of me for going into the Air Force, and always said so.
How did you keep in touch with her while you were in Vietnam?
Just letters. There wasn't any other way to do it in that day and age.
Yeah. Unless you had a tape recorder.
No, we didn't do that.
Okay.
She was not technically inclined, and for tape recorders you need electricity, and we didn't always have that. Our primary mission in Vietnam, as flying 123s, was hauling supplies into fire bases. Food, ammo, the necessities for a fire base. And we flew into perforated steel planking runways that were 50 feet wide and 1,100 feet long. And it had a stripe across the end of it. 200 feet from the end, there was a stripe across the runway. And if you weren't on the ground by then, you went around and tried again. Because if you weren't on the ground by then, you couldn't stop the damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
And because, like I say, you only had 1,100 feet, and that stripe, you had 900 feet left. And we took a little ground fire every now and then, but nothing serious. It seems the enemy never learned about windage. The only incoming fire that I took was always in the tail of the airplane. And there was nothing in the back of the airplane that could be harmed that way. We flew with the windows open because if you happened to get shot in the side, the glass would shower all over you. So we flew with the windows open to prevent that, the side windows.
Mm-hmm.
The windshield was probably a good inch thick, and it would stop small arms fire. It would deflect it. So, funny thing, I learned you can only hear if you hear shots you're being shot at, you can only hear it off the end of the gun. You don't hear when you're flying like that, and the wind noise and everything else. So you hear a pop, 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 somebody's shooting at you. And it turned out to be, while not every day, somewhat routine. And we would just wave to them. Of course, they couldn't see us, we couldn't see them. They were down in the jungle.
Where in Vietnam were you actually located?
I was stationed, I'm sorry, I left that out. I was stationed at Phan Rang, which is about 20 or 25 miles south of Cam Ranh Bay. And of course, we had a 5,000-foot concrete runway there. That was luxury.
You said that you're an instructor pilot. What were all of the planes that you flew?
I've covered them.
Yeah.
135 and 123. My job in 123 actually was training Vietnamese pilots
Okay.
in the C-123. But we trained them on actual missions. We didn't have what you might call a training mission. We trained them on actual missions
On the job.
all around the country, yeah, on the job training for them. And I put, I think 3 Vietnamese pilots and co-pilots through that training during the time I was there.
Was it difficult to adjust to the military when you came in, or?
No. No. It turns out, I guess, I like structure. And I didn't have any trouble at all, although I did have a small problem when I first went in. Some guy, I didn't know who or what he was, confronted me, at Lackland, my first day there. And he jabbed me in the chest with his forefinger, so I hit him. It turns out that was not the right thing to do. He squealed like a pig. But at any rate, he didn't hit me anymore. Didn't poke me anymore either. And I was told that that was not the way one should behave. But that's the only problem I had. It wasn't really a problem. It lasted a couple of minutes. But I liked the structure. I liked the camaraderie. The team, being a member of a team. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that my entire career.
You said that you were at Utapao.
Yeah.
What do you remember about that?
Well, Utapao was a town of, I don't know. It was pretty good size. It was probably a good mile across. And, of course, its main purpose, more or less, was supporting the base. And an awful lot of the people there lived in houses that were on stilts. So that when the rains came, it just went underneath them. They didn't get washed out. Nobody hardly had running water. There was a water truck came around, and they filled a barrel in every home as it went along, and they came around daily and took care of those folks. They were good people. I always had a good relationship with the Thais. And we used to, on occasion, once in a while we'd get a few days off in a row. And we would go to Pattaya Beach, which today is a tourist mecca. But then it was just barely getting started. And you could rent a house with about 4 or 5 bedrooms in it for about $5 a day, which was 100 baht in Thai money. And so we would rent a house and do beach stuff and just take the time off. Our favorite watering hole was on top of a bar on the roof. They had tables and chairs on the roof. And while there one day, there's a big hustle and bustle and carrying on. And the king and queen arrived. And at that time, everybody seemed to think that was a pretty normal thing. The Thais did. I mean, they bowed to the king and so on and so forth. And it turns out he was a real nice guy, very well. He was educated somewhere in the West. I'm not sure whether it was England or the U.S. I think it might have been England. But at any rate, he, and the Queen was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. And at any rate, that was kind of a fun day.
Did you ever learn to say their names? Their
No,
whole name?
no, no.
The guys that you went to pilot school with, the 6 guys, how long did you stay in contact with all of them? Do you still have contact with them now?
No, the 6 guys where I went to KC-97 school with the crew there. I still stay in contact with the navigator. All the rest are dead.
Was there any particular thing that you did before you would go out on a mission for good luck?
No, not really.
No. Okay.
Not really. We made sure that the airplane was in good shape.
Did the walk around?
Yeah, that was about it. I didn't do anything superstitious, so to speak, or anything like that. No.
Aside from going to the rooftop bar, what did you do for recreation? And this could be at any of your assignments.
Well, in Bermuda, my next door neighbor and I bought a boat and we water skied day in and day out in Harrington Sound, which was it was open to the ocean but through a narrow inlet, and about a mile long and a half mile wide, or maybe 2 miles long and a half mile wide. It's a pretty good sized lake, saltwater lake. And in Puerto Rico, we would go to the beach, of course. No sense being on an island if you don't go to a beach somewhere. Now, Bermuda had very few beaches. It's a coral atoll, is what it is. And an interesting thing about it is there's no mud because it's just coral.
Mm-hmm.
And the topsoil is ground coral. And all the houses there, they dig the foundation with a chainsaw out of the coral. They cut up the coral that they get from digging the foundation and they build the house with it. So the house is built from what turns out to be the basement and a cistern, because there's no running water in Bermuda. All you had was rainwater. So the roofs were all stone, or coral roof, and the downspouts went into the cistern. And that's where you got your water. And the health department would give you some fish to put in there to keep it clean. They give you geckos to keep the bugs down in the house. And they give you a housewife spider to put under the house to keep the bugs down. And it was a different way of living, but everything else was normal. We had electricity, obviously, and gas. Gas was propane, bottled propane.
Would your wife think of living in this house that had all of these little critters that...
Oh, well, she was from Jamaica,
Oh.
and it was normal to her. She had lived on Bermuda for several years. She was a sister, which is what, at that time, I don't know if it's still true, the British called supervising nurses a sister.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a nurse on communicable diseases ward. She was supervisor of the communicable diseases ward in the local, and only one hospital in Bermuda, there.
you didn't have the 2 years of college that they would have wanted you to have. Did you do any education while you were on duty?
Yeah. Once I got into 135s, we pulled alert duty a week at a time. And I believe the University of Maryland conducted the college courses. I've got about two years or so of college through doing that. Half to get education and half to kill time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you remember the last day that you were in the Air Force? What happened that day? Anything interesting?
No, of course, there was a bit of a goodbye party at the wing headquarters, and just in the briefing room, and a few slaps on the back, and one thing and another, and I was out of there. I left about 3:30 in the afternoon. I worked the morning, did my job. Yeah.
Was your mom still alive at that time?
Yes. In fact, a few years later, I moved her out here. She wanted to be, she was still in Maryland, of course.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted to come live near me and her grandchildren.
Oh, tell me about your children.
Well, I have four. Three daughters and a son. And of course, they're no longer children by a long shot. My oldest is, I think, 62, and the youngest is 52. So, and two daughters and son live within 5 miles of me here, and another daughter lives in Lincoln with her family.
Once you retired, what did you do with your civilian life?
Oh, well, one of the main reasons I stayed in Nebraska is I was offered a job before I got out. And it was with First Data Resources as a technical writer. One of the last things I did in the Air Force was I wrote a tactical doctrine for the E-4 aircraft. They had just moved the E-4s to Offutt that year. In fact, I was a project officer on the move, and a project officer. There's a committee, so to speak. Anyway, it was since the guy said, "Well, what have you done?" I said, "Well, the last thing I've done is write a book." And he said, "That's what we need. We need a technical writer." So I was a technical writer until I retired completely in 2005. I retired tax day 2005.
Did any of the units that you were assigned to have reunions after?
Yes, but I never went. Initially, it was either the expense or the distance, the time involved, versus my work commitments and whatnot. And then finally, I figured, I haven't seen any of those people in 20 years or more. It just didn't seem worth it to me. I stayed active here to some degree in the battalions. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
I recognize the name.
Yeah. Well, it's an association of military combat pilots.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. I'm no longer that active with them anymore. I'm a life member, but not active currently.
Any other veterans organizations that you belong to?
Well, I'm a life member in MOA, Military Officers Association of America.
Mm-hmm.
And they have monthly dinners and whatnot. Well, I'm on my second wife. My first wife and I parted ways in 1983. And then this other woman started following me around. That's my story, that's the way I
That's
tell
your
it.
story?
You know.
Okay.
At any rate, we got married in 1990. And so between us now we have 8 kids. She has 4 and I have 4. And they'll all be here at Christmas.
Good, good. All right, well, then this is a perfect time to ask you, what message would you like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview?
Well, I'd like to say I think we did our best. And we did our best by putting our nose to the grindstone and getting the job done. I loved the military. I was sorry to leave, but in a way. And I would recommend the military life to anybody. And today there's so many more opportunities, the way things are structured and the opportunities that people have. It's a great way for a young person to start life.
Have you shared your experiences in the military with your family or friends?
To a degree, yes.
Okay, so all your children know something about what you
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to go ahead and add on here?
Not that I can think of. I could reminisce all afternoon, but
Well, if you think that you're finished, you've got enough time. I had to have 30 minutes and you've got 32 now.
okay,
All right.
good.